the dialogue that helps do that. So we really should talk about the Meno and what the Meno does. What's the topic of the Meno? Anybody looked at it and see what they're looking for in general? Topic is what? Virtue in general. So that's kind of an interesting thing that, they name a bunch of virtues, but they're clear that they've got a set of things that they're calling virtues. So that's an interesting dilemma, really, if you're saying that there are ideas that all these ideas we have in our head are abstract entities that exist in time and space for all eternity. And you wonder, well, how do they get into our head then? And in this particular dialogue, Meno, who's the character that Socrates is talking to, I interpret the word Meno as meaning unchanging. And another example of it in the dialogues is Paramenides. Para means two. Meno, I would interpret as unchanging, and ideas. So Paramenides, I think of as two unchanging ideas. And Paramenides, who's the character, actually presents these paradoxes. You've got the two concepts like infinite and finite, or one and the many. So there's lots of them. Mathematics is full of this, and Zeno, his student in the dialogue, and Zeno is famous for these paradoxes. Paradoxa is just another such word. Para means two, and doxa means things you have to believe. You have to believe both of these things, but you're like, how can I believe both of these things? That's a dilemma, which is Latin for doxa, really. So you end up with a question: how do we think of knowledge? And Meno, in this case, I think stands for unchanging, and so the question is, how can virtue be taught? Can it be taught? And Plato's conclusion in this is it can't. You cannot teach someone virtue. They either have it or they don't. And how is that supposed to be explained? Well, remember, your soul is not created. It's already floating somehow in the infinite. No explanation for how that works because it's totally abstract. The point is that which has no parts. The soul has no parts either. So what the heck are they talking about? But so you get the idea that the soul already knows everything that it already knows. And it knows all of that because by being part of the infinite, it's actually already connected to all of that, everything, all the ideas. Your soul already knows all of it. So how do we explain things like President Trump? And that could have been funny. It was funny to at least a few people. Could get me fired as well, depending. But there is stupidity. That's pretty obvious too. And if you've ever been a mother and you're teaching your child things like don't touch fire and all that kind of stuff, it seems pretty obvious that people learn. And what Plato seems to be arguing is there is no real learning. What the heck is going on then? And he comes up with this concept. Now, you asked a terrific question last class. Where is all this going? What on earth is the evidence for any of this? By the way, that's a real contemporary question. That depends on a scientific point of view. which we think of as not really starting until what, the 19th century, really. Aristotle will give us a kind of science, and scientia just is Latin for knowledge. But what we mean by a contemporary science, we think experimental science, where we got demonstrable proof that this is, the cause of this, or something of that sort. And they don't have that, and none of that is part of what Plato's doing. He's creating a great big fictional worldview. It's still important for us because it's still a very influential worldview that still affects our language and our culture. So here we're looking at where it got started, right? This is the genius that basically invented all these ideas. How does he get out of these kinds of problems? Well, he says, at birth, we go through amnesia. Amnesia is, the word is a, which in Greek means not. It's a prefix for not. Amnesia is memory, right? So amnesia is no memory. So at birth, he says the soul is shocked coming into this body. And as a result, there's a forgetting. And then as we learn basically what's happening, and this is how it fits into his theory, right, is we're getting a remembering. We're not learning something new. We're remembering what we already knew.
Imperfect reflection.
And the word for that in Greek is anamnesis. A-N-A means the same as R-E in Latin. So remembering, right? Anamnesis helps us recover somewhat. And midway in this dialogue, he ends up asking for a slave boy to join them. And the slave boy comes over, and he does ask, does he speak Greek? Yes. Well, that's important. You wouldn't be able to talk to him otherwise. But so the boy comes over, and he basically takes him through a mathematical sequence, and the boy figures everything out. Occasionally the boy makes a mistake, and Socrates offers a question that helps him fix his own mistake, and he keeps on going on. And he essentially comes up with the Pythagorean theorem. Right? The boy does, without any prior education. And so Socrates is now at the point where he says, now, did he know this? Well, he must have had it in his mind already, and I reminded him of it, right? So this Socratic method of drawing knowledge out of a person by basically giving clues and hints, lead someone to think for themselves so that they themselves end up figuring out the answers. That's what Socrates is trying to do, right? He even refers to himself as a midwife. He's not the one that's creating the child. The wife is having the child, the mother is having the child and giving birth and everything. And the midwife is just guiding, helping, assisting, right? So Socrates doesn't think of himself as a teacher, but instead as a midwife, helping people relearn what they already, in the prior existence of the soul, already knew. So, and the other half of this is that the character that you have is already there in its entirety. So it's not like you can learn to be virtuous. You either like the virtues or you don't, depending on your character. Now, how do we explain that? I mean, remember, he's making this up. This is, if you're a fan of Tolkien, Tolkien has a whole bunch of creatures. He has Ents in the forest that are the tree herders. He has elves. He has dwarves. He has orcs. You could ask all sorts of questions like orcs. Do orcs have wives? You never see any orc wives, right? You never see any dwarf wives, actually. You wonder why, right? I mean, there's a whole lot of holes in Tolkien's world, but it is entertaining. It's made a fortune for modern people, even though he didn't live to see most of it, right? Didn't make the movies. There's all kinds of problems with the movies. Plato, in a sense, is just making up a fictitious world to try to explain a whole bunch of questions that the Greeks had. And people believed it for like 2,000 or more years. There's still an awful lot. You talk about ideas, and when you think of an idea, what do you think of as an idea? Is it something that's just inside your head? That's kind of difficult. Do we discover mathematical formulas, or do we invent them?
That's been like we had talked to Aristotle or Plato.
I think that one's easy.
Yeah.
Discovered.
I feel like they're discovered.
Plato believes that we already know it, and we just have to do study and contemplation to get it out of our mind something that we already know, because the soul doesn't live in the body. The soul is separate from the body, and we're just, everything we see now is just a reflection of what we already know. And you just said Socrates uses that as a thing that's bringing out of people because it was already, he believes it was already there. Or I believe that he just goes down to the most simplistic version of whatever he's talking about that even a boy can understand.
And your map, your mental map kind of matches this. So when we have Sir Isaac Newton come up with a measurement that shows that gravity can be measured, or well, we never called him Sir, but Einstein, when old one mug, basically Einstein, right? One mug. That could be funny too, but not. Right. He came up with things. Actually, probably was his wife, but he's the one that got credit for it. That's like, wow, this is amazing stuff. Some of it, he said he had a secret source. I suspect his secret source was Leibniz, but we'll talk about that when we get to Leibniz. But was he inventing or was he discovering? We would say that he's discovering the way things are. And that's kind of a Platonic worldview, really. The idea that this abstract structure of the universe is mathematical. And it's really there. It really works for us. Although we have a lot of problems with mathematics, the same as Tolkien did with explaining orcs, where orcs came from, where ents came from. Well, where did this come from? It was already there. Well, how so? Did it evolve? Ooh, that's another question, right? Is mathematics evolving? Yes.
Always.
Thank you.
Just like every other science.
Excellent. I would agree that in a sense, while Plato is arguing that everything is already there in the universe, our contemporary situation is that we're evolving this stuff. We're developing it.
I think that we already have all this stuff in the universe somewhere. We just have to discover it.
Just have to look in the right places. If you watch Stuart Hameroff's video, one of the things he points out that so many people think our brain, all the neurons and everything, that explains why we think. And it's at the neural level. It's not at the sub-neural level where he likes to go. And then he points out, well, you've got single-celled creatures like paramecium. You've ever seen them swimming around? They know to go left or right. They know where to find food. And they've only got one cell, so there's no neural network, and yet they're making decisions. So that seems a pretty good explanation for why our consciousness has to be even lower than the neural network. It has to be inside or microtubules is his argument. Inside our microtubules, what do you have? You have quarks. Well, that's our contemporary evolved physics theory, that we used to have atoms, and atom means uncuttable, right? A means not, and cuttable, atom. So you can't get any smaller. Well, of course, they figured out how to get smaller. And by the way, once they did that, they didn't refer to it as, well, it's still matter. They decided, well, at that point, it's subatomic, it's not matter.